The first frost of December had settled on the town, painting the streets in a slick, crystalline sheen. I wasn't planning to go out that night, but an unexpected message from my husband, he'd forgotten to pick up supplies for a work project, left me pulling on my coat and grabbing my keys. It was just after 8 p.m., and the parking lot of the Kmart store on the edge of town was eerily deserted. A lone flickering street lamp cast jagged shadows across the rows of empty spaces, and the hum of its dying bulb was the only sound cutting through the freezing air. The soft crunch of my boots on the frosty asphalt seemed unnaturally loud, echoing in the stillness. As I approached, the automatic doors hissed open, releasing a burst of warm, sterile air that felt strangely uninviting. Inside, the store was unusually quiet, its aisles mostly empty, except for a handful of employees restocking shelves. The faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead seemed to grow louder with each step. Their flickering lights cast erratic, disturbing shadows that danced across the linoleum floor. I grabbed a basket and began weaving through the aisles, determined to make this a quick trip. About 10 minutes in, I noticed a man lingering by the seasonal display. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't even pretending to window shop. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of a faded green jacket, and his gaze seemed fixed somewhere just beyond me. When I turned down the next aisle, I caught a glimpse of him again in my peripheral vision, moving at an unhurried but deliberate pace. The faint squeak of his worn sneakers against the polished floor echoed faintly behind me, sending a chill up my spine. I paused near the canned goods, pretending to examine the labels, but my focus was entirely on the reflective surface of the freezer door ahead. Through the distorted reflection, I could see him, standing at the end of the aisle, half hidden behind a display of snacks. He wasn't looking at the products, not even showing interest. He was looking at me. The flickering fluorescent light above him cast uneven shadows across his face, deliberately hiding his features in a way that sent a chill down my spine. I shifted my position, moving toward the next aisle as casually as I could manage, but his reflection didn't waver. He was still there, unmoving. My grip tightened on the basket handle, and I forced myself to take slow, measured steps, resisting the urge to glance over my shoulder. The moment I turned the corner, I quickened my pace, heading toward the busier part of the store. But as I reached the pharmacy section, I felt it again, that prickle at the back of my neck. The faint sound of footsteps, just distant enough to be dismissible, but persistent enough to confirm I wasn't alone. I stopped near a rack of cold remedies, pretending to check the labels, but my heart was pounding hard enough to drown out the words. The quiet around me seemed suffocating, like the store itself was holding its breath. Glancing down the aisle, I caught a flash of movement, a shadow slipping past the edge of the shelves. It wasn't the man in the green jacket. This figure was shorter, dressed in dark clothes that blended into the dimly lit space. For a split second, I thought it was an employee, yet their movements lacked the casual ease of someone going about their work, as if they didn't belong. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I didn't want to overreact. Instead, I forced myself to walk toward the central aisle, hoping to spot a staff member or someone else who could break the oppressive stillness. As I stepped into the open space, my stomach sank. The man in the green jacket stood at the far end, casually leaning against a shelf as if he were waiting for someone. His posture was relaxed, almost too much so, like he was trying to seem nonchalant. That's when I noticed the second figure again, this time standing near the frozen foods, mirroring the first man's stance. The two were perfectly positioned to flank me, their gazes cutting through the distance like a silent signal. I froze, suddenly hyper-aware of how far I was from the entrance. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the panic rising in my chest. Maybe it was all just a coincidence. I tried to convince myself. Just two strangers going about their business, and my nerves playing tricks on me. But then, as I turned toward the dairy section, the overhead lights flickered violently, plunging the aisle into brief bursts of shadow. The hum of the store's fluorescent bulbs wavered, crackling like static in a broken radio. I glanced back, and the man in the green jacket was no longer at the far end of the aisle. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of him, but he was gone. vanished like he'd dissolved into the air. The second figure was gone too, leaving an eerie stillness in their wake. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I gripped the handle of my basket tighter, the plastic creaking under my white-knuckled grasp. The store, once a mundane haven of packaged goods and soft background music, now felt cavernous, its aisles stretching into shadowed voids. Then I heard it. A faint, wet thud echoed from somewhere deeper in the store, followed by the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. My body froze as the sound grew closer, rhythmic and deliberate, like it was moving with purpose. It stopped suddenly, leaving an oppressive silence that felt louder than any noise. I forced myself to move, each step feeling heavier than the last as I turned down an aisle lined with towering shelves of canned goods. The sound had come from this direction, or at least, it felt like it had. The aisle stretched endlessly in the dim, flickering light, the cans reflecting distorted images of the fluorescent glare and my pale, uneasy face. The air felt colder here, unnaturally so, like I'd stepped into a refrigerator. A faint metallic scent lingered, sharp and out of place among the sterile store smells. My ears strained for any hint of movement, but the silence pressed in, deafening and suffocating. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow shifting between the shelves, not on the floor but stretching unnaturally along the walls and ceiling. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The shadow didn't align with any object nearby. It moved too fluidly, almost alive, slithering along the shelves as if it were searching for something, or maybe someone. The dragging sound resumed, faint but deliberate, and this time it seemed to echo from above. I tilted my head back slowly, terrified of what I might see. The ceiling panels above me trembled faintly, like something was crawling just out of sight. A sudden loud crack echoed as one of the panels split open slightly, and a thin stream of dark liquid dripped down, splattering onto the pristine white tiles at my feet. I stumbled back, my breath coming in sharp gasps as I stared at the viscous, dark substance pooling on the floor. The smell hit me then, coppery and thick, clinging to the air like an invisible weight. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted in place, as if the floor itself had turned into quicksand. The drip intensified, each droplet landing on the floor with a sickening, splattering sound, forming a growing pool of that dark, viscous liquid. My chest tightened as I forced myself to back away, the soles of my shoes sticking slightly to the tiled floor with each step. The dragging sound returned, louder now, echoing through the store like a macabre symphony. It wasn't just in one place anymore. It seemed to surround me, reverberating off the shelves and walls. I turned sharply, eyes darting to every corner, but the aisles stretched empty, an oppressive silence crushing in after each unnerving scrape. Then, as if the store itself were alive, the shelves began to tremble, a low groan emanating from the metal racks. Cans rattled and toppled to the floor, rolling aimlessly in every direction. One stopped at my feet, spinning slowly before coming to rest with its label facing me. A brand I didn't recognize. The text smeared and unreadable, as though it had been submerged in water and left to decay. The air grew denser, colder still, until my breath came out in visible puffs. My reflection in the metal doors of the nearby freezers caught my attention, but something was wrong. The glass shimmered faintly, distorting my image like a warped funhouse mirror. I stepped closer, hesitant, and froze. My reflection didn't move. It stared back at me, identical but lifeless, the expression blank and unblinking. Then, slowly, the corners of its mouth twisted upward into a grotesque grin, teeth bared and unnaturally sharp. I stumbled back with a cry, colliding with the shelves behind me as the cans tumbled down in a deafening cascade. When I looked again, the freezer door was normal, just my pale, terrified face staring back. The lights flickered again, plunging the aisle into momentary darkness. In the black void, a faint whisper tickled my ears. Not words, just a sound, wet and guttural, like something struggling to breathe. It was close, too close. When the lights came back on, everything was still again. The dragging sound had stopped. The dark liquid on the floor was gone. It was as if nothing had happened. And yet, just at the edge of my vision, I caught movement again. A figure stepping around the corner of an aisle, but only partially visible. Its limbs unnaturally long and thin, its movements jerky, like a marionette being clumsily controlled. My heart raced as the figure disappeared into the next aisle without a sound. My instincts screamed at me to run. Whatever this was, whoever this was, I didn't want to find out. I gripped my cart tightly, every nerve in my body on high alert, and began retracing my steps toward the store's entrance. The wheels squeaked faintly as I pushed forward, the sound cutting through the oppressive silence like a desperate cry for help. As I approached the main aisle, my path was blocked. One of the mannequins from the display area stood in the middle of the walkway. At least I thought it was a mannequin. Its proportions were wrong, its arms too long, its neck bent at an impossible angle. And then I saw it, the faintest twitch of its hand. I didn't think. I turned sharply, abandoning my cart, and darted toward the opposite end of the store. My breath was ragged, every step echoing in the vast, desolate space. The overhead lights flickered erratically now, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and twist toward me. The air felt heavier with each passing second, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I reached the electronics section and stopped to catch my breath. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, desperate to call for help. But the screen glitched, lines of static flickering across it before the device powered down completely. I stared at it in disbelief, and then the store's intercom crackled to life. At first it was just static, but then, faintly, I heard a voice. A deep, distorted murmur, like a radio caught between stations.
"You're not supposed to be here,"
it said, the words dragging out unnaturally. My blood ran cold. I bolted toward the entrance, ignoring the sound of something crashing behind me. Shelves toppled in my wake, the thundering noise chasing me down like a predator. My legs burned as I pushed myself harder, the fluorescent lights above flickering in rapid succession, leaving pockets of darkness along my path. Finally, the automatic doors came into view, but they weren't opening. I skidded to a halt, slamming my hands against the glass. "Open!" I screamed, my voice breaking. The doors remained stubbornly shut, the outside world just beyond reach. Behind me, the dragging sound returned, louder now, accompanied by faint whispers that grew into an unintelligible cacophony. I spun around, and my heart sank. The figure was there, standing at the end of the aisle, its head tilted in that grotesque, unnatural way. Behind it, more shadows began to emerge, stepping forward one by one. They didn't move like people. They moved like broken things, jerking and twitching with each step. I forced myself to step away from the unyielding doors, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The figures at the end of the aisle remained motionless, their twisted forms barely illuminated under the flickering lights. Their presence was oppressive, like the air itself had turned into a dense, suffocating fog. I didn't dare look for long. I couldn't risk freezing up. To my left, a small, glowing exit sign hung above a door near the back of the store. A service exit, maybe? It was my best shot. I bolted toward it, weaving through the aisles, my shoes squeaking against the tiled floor. Behind me, the sound of dragging and low whispers intensified, echoing in the vast space as if they were closing in from all directions. Reaching the door, I grabbed the handle and pushed with all my strength. It didn't budge. A loud metallic clang echoed in the hallway, followed by a distant, eerie creak. My pulse quickened as I spotted a heavy chain locking the door shut, the metal looking rusted and ancient, as though it had been there far longer than the store itself. "No," I muttered, my voice trembling. I yanked at the chain desperately, but it held firm. The whispers grew louder now, closer. They weren't just behind me anymore. They were everywhere, circling like vultures. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. Something darted past the end of the aisle, too fast, too low to the ground to be human. The sound of scuttling claws followed, sharp and deliberate, like nails raking against the tiled floor. I backed away from the chained door, my mind racing. My options were dwindling, and the oppressive feeling in the store was growing unbearable. Then, through the static of the intercom, a soft, childlike giggle pierced the air. It was distant at first, but then it came again, closer this time, echoing from the toy section nearby. I couldn't bear the thought of heading toward that giggle. It felt like a trap, something deliberately drawing me closer to whatever nightmare had taken over the store. My instincts screamed at me to focus on escape. The service exit was a dead end, but there had to be another way. I remembered the loading dock area in the back of the store, often used for deliveries. If I could just make it there, maybe there was another door or an open bay. I took one last look around and sprinted through the aisles, dodging overturned shelves and carts as I moved deeper into the store. Every step seemed to echo unnaturally, as though the walls themselves were amplifying the sound, mocking my attempt to flee. As I approached the back, the air grew colder, almost icy. I could see my breath in the dim light, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I spotted the large double doors leading to the loading area and slammed into them, desperate to push through. To my relief, they opened without resistance, revealing a dimly lit space filled with pallets and boxes. The sound of a slow, deliberate knock echoed from the walls. Once, twice, I froze, my hand still on the door, and held my breath. The knock came again, this time accompanied by a faint scraping sound, like something sharp being dragged across concrete. I couldn't see the source, and I wasn't about to wait and find out. I spotted a faint orange glow, the illuminated switch for the loading dock's overhead door. My hands trembled as I ran to it and smashed the button. The mechanism groaned loudly as the door began to rise. The metallic clatter of the door seemed to wake something in the shadows, and the scraping sound grew faster, more frantic. The door crept upward, agonizingly slow. Cold air rushed in, accompanied by the faint howl of wind, and the world outside came into view, a small sliver of freedom that widened inch by inch. I crouched low, ready to duck under the door the moment it was high enough. My pulse was deafening in my ears as the noises behind me grew louder, closer. The door was finally high enough. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself under it and rolled out onto the asphalt, feeling the rough surface scrape against my palms. The icy wind hit me like a wall, but I didn't care. I was outside. I turned just in time to see the shadows inside twist and retreat as the overhead door slammed shut behind me with a final, resounding crash. The stillness of the night was overwhelming, broken only by the faint hum of streetlights in the distance. My car was parked at the far end of the lot, and I bolted toward it without looking back. I reached my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys in my purse. My mind raced. What had I just experienced? The silence outside felt almost too quiet, like the world had held its breath while I was trapped in that store. I unlocked the door and jumped inside, slamming it shut with a frantic jerk. The engine roared to life, but I didn't drive off immediately. Something was off. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a heavy weight pressing down on me. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone watching me from behind, but there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I told myself it was just the adrenaline, the shock of everything that had happened, but my eyes kept darting to the dark corners of the parking lot. It was as if the night itself was watching me, waiting. My hand gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I began to pull out of the lot when I saw it. A white van parked across the street, just sitting there, its headlights off, barely visible in the dim light. The same kind of van I had seen earlier, parked behind the store. I froze. It was the same van. I did not doubt in my mind. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled again, and I felt the weight of the night press down on me. I turned the corner, desperate to get home, but something caught my eye in the side mirror. A fleeting movement, just a shadow shifting in the parking lot, barely noticeable against the darkness. My heart stopped for a split second. It wasn't just the van anymore. There were figures now. 3 of them, standing in the middle of the lot, staring in my direction. I floored the gas pedal, my breath coming in ragged bursts, trying to distance myself from whatever had followed me. The road stretched ahead, empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still there, watching me. As I drove, I glanced down at my phone, distracted for a moment by the sudden ping of a message. It was from my husband, just checking in to see how I was doing. I smiled weakly, typed a quick reply, and put the phone down. But then, something made me glance at it again. There was another message, said just moments ago. It was from a number I didn't recognize. The message was short, and it sent a chill through my entire body. It read, "We've been watching you all along. Don't think you're safe yet." I slammed the brakes, my car screeching to a halt in the middle of the road. My heart pounded in my chest. The feeling of being hunted, of being trapped, was overwhelming. I looked around, but there was nothing, just the empty street, the quiet night. But the unsettling truth had set in. Whatever had been inside that store, whatever had been following me, wasn't over. It had never been over. I wasn't just a random target. I was part of something bigger, something I couldn't understand, but that I knew deep down I wasn't alone in. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to What the Fright for more spine-chilling tales. Got a real horror story? We'd love to hear it. Send it to us. Our email is in the description below. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next Fright.